The sound of a Rolls-Royce Phantom's engine purring away is a sound of pure luxury. But for Jessica Morgan, 6 months pregnant and standing in the freezing November rain, it was the sound of her life ending. The custom-tailored Valentino dress she wore to the charity gala just hours before was now clinging to her skin, soaked and ruined. The diamond necklace her husband had clasped around her neck felt as cold as the steel of the Queensborough Bridge looming behind her. He hadn't just left her. He had ordered his driver to pull over, pushed her out onto the pavement, and thrown a single $100 bill at her feet. That's what her life and the life of their unborn child was worth to the Prescott dynasty. Little did they know a forgotten name and a dusty old will were about to change everything. Jessica Morgan had always felt like an outsider in the world of the Prescotts. She met Brendan Prescott during her final year at NYU, where she was studying art history on a scholarship. He was the charming, impossibly handsome heir to the Prescott real estate empire, a sprawling portfolio of commercial properties and luxury high-rises that made his family a pillar of New York's high society. He'd pursued her with a relentless storybook passion. He loved that she wasn't like the other women in his circle who measured life in carats and couture seasons. She was genuine kind, with a quiet intelligence that he found intoxicating. Their wedding was an event chronicled in Forbes and Town & Country, a lavish affair at the Plaza Hotel that felt more like a corporate merger than a union of two people in love. Jessica, an orphan who had aged out of the foster care system, had no family to invite. Her side of the church was filled with a handful of college friends, a stark contrast to the sea of influential figures on Brendan's side. The matriarch Genevieve Prescott made her disapproval clear from the start. Genevieve was a woman carved from ice, with a gaze that could assess a person's net worth in a single sweep. To her, Jessica was a stain on their pristine lineage, a girl with no name, no money, and no connections. A pretty face is a fleeting asset. Dear, she'd once told Jessica, her voice dripping with condescension while adjusting a Patek Philippe watch on her wrist. Bloodline is forever. For 2 years, Jessica tried to fit in. She learned which forks to use, how to host a dinner party for a dozen billionaires, and how to smile placidly while her mother-in-law made thinly veiled insults about her background. She loved Brendan, and she believed he loved her. But she saw how he wilted under his mother's influence, his charming confidence dissolving into a boyish need for approval. He was a prince, but his mother was the queen who truly ruled the kingdom. The turning point was the pregnancy. Jessica had thought a child, a Prescott heir, would finally cement her place in the family. She was wrong. When she and Brendan announced the news over dinner in their cavernous Upper East Side penthouse, Genevieve's reaction was terrifyingly cold. "Have you had the paternity confirmed?" Genevieve asked, dabbing her lips with a napkin. Brendan, to his credit, was furious. "Mother, how could you even suggest that I am merely being practical?" "Darling," she replied, her eyes fixed on Jessica. "In our world, we cannot afford ambiguities. This family has a reputation to uphold." The conversation planted a seed of poison. In the weeks that followed, Genevieve's campaign intensified. She would talk to Brendan for hours behind closed doors. She hired a private investigator to dig into Jessica's past, searching for any dirt to disqualify her. Jessica could feel Brendan pulling away the warmth in his eyes, replaced by a constant, anxious shadow. He started drinking more, spending long nights at the office, and when he was home, he was distant and irritable. The final night came without warning. It was the annual Prescott Foundation Charity Gala. Jessica, 6 months pregnant and feeling more vulnerable than ever, wore a stunning crimson Valentino gown, a gift from Brendan. She tried to connect with him all evening, but he was evasive, his smiles tight and his eyes darting towards his mother, who watched them from across the ballroom like a hawk. On the ride home, in the back of the Rolls-Royce, the silence was suffocating. As the car turned onto a desolate access road near the Queensborough Bridge, Brendan finally spoke, his voice devoid of all emotion. "It's over, Jessica." She stared at him, her heart seizing in her chest. "What are you talking about, Brendan?" "My mother is right," he said, not looking at her. "This was a mistake. You don't fit. You never will." He gestured to the driver. "Pull over, Charles." The car glided to a halt. The rain was coming down in sheets. "Get out," Brendan said. Tears streamed down Jessica's face, mingling with the rain that was already seeping through the open door. "Brendan, please. I'm pregnant with your child. Our child. Where am I supposed to go?" He finally looked at her, and in his eyes she saw nothing but the cold reflection of his mother's ambition. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his money clip, and peeled off a single bill. $100 bill. "You're resourceful," he said, his voice flat. He threw the bill onto the seat beside her. "Figure it out." Before she could react, he shoved her gently but firmly out of the car. She stumbled onto the wet pavement, the cold seeping through the thin silk of her dress. The heavy door slammed shut with a deafening thud. Through the rain-streaked window, she saw him say one more word to the driver. Then the Rolls-Royce Phantom, the symbol of her gilded cage, accelerated smoothly into the night, leaving her alone, pregnant and abandoned, on the merciless streets of New York City. The $100 bill lay on the wet asphalt at her feet, a final cruel insult. The first few weeks were a blur of shock and survival. The $100 was gone in 2 days, spent on a cheap motel room in Queens, where Jessica cried until she had no tears left. Her life, her identity had been erased. Her phone was disconnected, her credit cards were declined, and the security guards at her former penthouse apartment building, men who had previously tipped their hats to her, looked at her with cold indifference, under strict orders not to let her in. The Prescotts had systematically cut her out, as if she had never existed. Pawning the diamond necklace Brendan had given her was one of the hardest things she'd ever done. The jeweler, a shrewd man in a small shop in Astoria, gave her a fraction of its worth, but the few $1,000s felt like a fortune. It was enough for a deposit on a tiny walk-up apartment in a less than savory part of Brooklyn, and some basic necessities for herself and her coming baby. Jessica was no stranger to hardship. The foster system had taught her resilience. She swallowed her pride and found a job at a 24-hour diner, bussing tables and refilling coffee cups on the night shift. Her body ached, her feet swelled, and the smell of grease clung to her clothes, a stark contrast to the Chanel No. 5 she used to wear. Some nights, she would catch her reflection in the diner's window, a pregnant, tired-looking woman in a cheap uniform, and the memory of the woman in the Valentino gown felt like a dream. Her only connection to her past was a small, worn box of belongings she'd kept from her childhood. It contained a few faded photographs of her parents who had died in a car crash when she was 3. One photo was of her mother, a beautiful woman with kind eyes, standing in front of an old, grand-looking house. Jessica didn't know much about her mother's family, only that they had disowned her for marrying her father, a struggling musician. The name on the back of the photo, written in faded ink, was Kensington. One dreary afternoon, after a grueling shift, she found a letter in her mailbox. It was thick, official-looking parchment, forwarded from her old address. The sender was a prestigious Manhattan law firm, Chen, Petrocelli and Associates. Her first thought was that the Prescotts were suing her, perhaps, for the return of the necklace. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. The letter was not a lawsuit. It was a summons. It requested her presence for the reading of the last will and testament of one Madame the Kensington. Jessica stared at the name. Kensington. The name from the back of the photograph. She had never known her maternal grandfather. Her mother had spoken of him only once with a deep sadness, describing him as a powerful, unforgiving man who had shut her out of his life completely. Could it be the same person? It had to be a mistake. Or perhaps he'd left her a token amount, a final posthumous insult. Still a sliver of curiosity, a desperate need for any connection to family, compelled her to go. The law office was located in a skyscraper overlooking Central Park, a world away from her Brooklyn walk-up. The polished marble floors and silent, expensive-looking art made her feel acutely aware of her worn-out maternity dress and scuffed shoes. She was led into a large boardroom with a mahogany table so long it could have seated 30 people. At the head of the table sat a man who introduced himself as David Chen. He was younger than she expected, with a calm, reassuring demeanor. He didn't seem to notice or care about her appearance. "Miss Morgan, thank you for coming," he said, his voice gentle. "I was your grandfather's attorney and the executor of his estate." I never met him," Jessica stammered. "I don't understand why I'm here." David Chen slid a thick, leather-bound document across the table. Arthur Kensington was a very private man. He amassed a considerable fortune over his lifetime. He passed away 2 months ago. You, Jessica, as the only child of his late daughter Elizabeth, are his sole living descendant. Jessica's mind reeled. Sole descendant Chen continued. Your grandfather was a complex man. He and your mother had a falling out, one he regretted profoundly for the rest of his life. He spent years trying to find her, and when he finally did, he learned she had passed away. He then spent the last decade searching for you. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He found you about a year ago. He followed your life from a distance, saw your marriage. He was reluctant to interfere, fearing another rejection. He was in the process of drafting a letter to you when he had his final heart attack. Tears welled in Jessica's eyes. A grandfather, a family she never knew she had who had been searching for her. The Prescotts, she whispered. Do they know? David Chen's expression hardened slightly. They were notified as a matter of legal courtesy given your marital status at the time of Mr. Kensington's death. They have not responded cordially. He opened the will. His voice was steady and clear as he read the legal jargon, but Jessica only heard the numbers, figures so astronomical they seemed unreal. Arthur Kensington had been the founder and sole owner of a global logistics and private equity firm, Kensington Holdings. He owned properties in London, Zurich, and Hong Kong. He had a portfolio of art and rare antiquities that would make a museum curator weep, and he had left it all to her. David Chen looked up from the document, his gaze meeting hers. To be precise, Ms. Morgan, your grandfather's estate, after all. Assets are liquidated and taxes are paid, is valued at approximately $2.7 billion. Jessica sat in stunned silence. The room seemed to tilt. Billion. With a B. There is, however, one complication, Chen said carefully. A clause in the will. It's an old-fashioned stipulation, but legally sound. It states that the inheritance is to pass to his bloodline. As you are pregnant, the transfer of assets is conditional upon the birth of your child, who will legally secure the Kensington lineage. Before Jessica could process this, Chen's assistant entered the room, her face pale. "Mr. Chen," she said urgently, "Walter Finch from Sterling and Cromwell is on line 1. He says he represents the Prescott family. He's informing us they intend to formally contest the will." David Chen's calm demeanor didn't falter. He simply nodded. "Tell Mr. Finch I'll be with him in a moment." He turned back to Jessica, his eyes filled with a new resolve. "Miss Morgan," he said, his voice firm, "it appears your old life isn't quite finished with you. The Prescotts have just declared war. The news of the Kensington will hit the Prescott family like a seismic shock wave. Genevieve Prescott was in the middle of a board meeting for one of her charities when her personal assistant interrupted something that was strictly forbidden. The message was urgent. Brendan was on the phone, his voice shaking with a mixture of disbelief and panic. Genevieve listened in stony silence as Brendan relayed the news. A $2.7 billion inheritance. Her discarded daughter-in-law, the girl from the gutter, was now poised to become one of the wealthiest women in the country. The irony was so bitter it tasted like acid. She had thrown away a lottery ticket only to watch it become the winning number. Her mind, always sharp and strategic, immediately went into battle mode. This wasn't just about the money. It was about power, reputation, and control. The idea of Jessica Morgan, the girl she had personally cast out, wielding that kind of influence, was intolerable. The media would have a field day. The Prescotts would become a laughingstock. "Walter Finch," she said into the phone, her voice like ice. "Get him on the line, now!" Walter Finch was the apex predator of the New York legal world. A senior partner at Sterling and Cromwell, he was known for his scorched earth tactics and his utter lack of scruples. He didn't argue cases, he dismantled lives. Within the hour, he was in Genevieve's drawing room, a sleek shark in a $1,000 suit. "The situation is unique," Finch said, after reviewing the initial documents. "The will appears ironclad. The old man Kensington had his affairs in perfect order. Our primary angle of attack is the beneficiary herself." Jessica Genevieve spat the name. "She's a nobody. There must be something in her past." "We're already digging," Finch assured her. "But the most immediate point of leverage is the child. The will ties the inheritance to the continuation of the bloodline. Therefore, the paternity of that child is everything." A slow, cruel smile spread across Genevieve's face. "Paternity," she repeated. It was the same poison she had used to manipulate her son, and now it would be her weapon in court. The Prescott machine roared to life. A multi-pronged assault was launched designed to break Jessica before she ever set foot in a courtroom. First came the media campaign. Anonymous sources close to the Prescott family began leaking stories to gossip columns like Page 6 and online tabloids. The narratives were vicious and carefully crafted. Jessica was painted as a cunning gold digger who had trapped the Prescott heir. They questioned her fidelity, hinting at affairs and a promiscuous past she didn't have. They used her foster care background against her, suggesting she was unstable and manipulative. Then came the financial pressure. Using their immense influence, the Prescotts made quiet calls. The diner where Jessica worked suddenly found itself facing a slew of health code violations and was forced to close for a week. The landlord of her Brooklyn apartment began finding reasons to harass her, threatening eviction over minor infractions. They were trying to make her homeless again, to destabilize her and make her desperate. Jessica felt the walls closing in. Her face was splashed across tabloid websites, often next to unflattering pictures taken without her knowledge. Whispers followed her down the street. It was a psychological war, and she was the sole target. David Chen became her anchor in the storm. He moved her out of the Brooklyn apartment and into a secure, undisclosed corporate apartment owned by the Kensington estate. He hired a discreet security detail to protect her from the paparazzi and any other threats. "This is what they do, Jessica," he told her during one of their strategy meetings, his office now a sanctuary from the chaos. "Finch's strategy is to isolate you, discredit you, and overwhelm you until you're willing to accept a low-ball settlement to make it all go away. They are counting on you to break." "And the baby?" She asked, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly. "They will demand a DNA test. They will file motions to question Brendan's paternity. They will turn this into a circus and make you the main attraction. Our job is to prove not only that you are the rightful heir, but that their entire case is built on malice and lies." The first official legal salvo arrived, a formal petition from the Prescott family, filed by Walter Finch. It contested the will on the grounds of undue influence and questionable beneficiary character. It also included a motion to compel a prenatal paternity test, citing significant doubts regarding the child's lineage. Reading the document felt like being physically struck. The cold, legalistic language twisted her life into a sordid tale of deceit. They were not just trying to take her inheritance. They were trying to delegitimize her child. Brendan, she learned through David, was a ghost in the machine. He was not present at the meetings with Finch. He was reportedly on an extended business trip in Europe, a move clearly orchestrated by Genevieve to keep him out of the line of fire and away from any potential feelings of guilt or loyalty towards Jessica. He was a pawn, just as she had been. One evening, as Jessica stared out the window of her new anonymous apartment at the glittering expanse of the city that had tried to chew her up and spit her out, her fear began to curdle into something else. Anger. A cold, hard resolve settled in her heart. They had underestimated her. They saw the poor orphan, the discarded wife. They didn't see the survivor. They wanted a war. She would give them one, not for the billions of dollars, but for the one thing that now mattered more than anything: the name and the future of her unborn child. She picked up the phone and called David Chen. "David," she said, her voice steady. "No more defense. It's time to fight back. Dig into the Prescotts. Dig into their businesses, their history, everything. They wanted to know about my past, fine. Let's show them what their own future is going to look like." The Manhattan Supreme Court became the arena for a war waged not with weapons, but with motions, depositions, and character assassinations. The case of Prescott v. The estate of Arthur Kensington quickly became the most talked-about legal drama in New York, a battle of old money versus new, of legacy versus a ghost from the past. Walter Finch was as ruthless as his reputation suggested. In the preliminary hearings, he was a master of insinuation. He referred to Jessica not by name, but as the claimant. He spoke of her background in a pitying tone that was designed to portray her as a desperate opportunist. His primary legal argument was that Arthur Kensington, in his old age and isolation, had been mentally incompetent, perhaps even senile, and had fixated on an unworthy stranger as a way to spite the world. "This isn't a will, Your Honor," Finch argued before Judge Eleanor Davies, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had seen every legal trick in the book. "It's the final tragic delusion of a lonely old man. The Prescott family seeks only to protect the sanctity of their family unit from this predatory intrusion." David Chen was Finch's polar opposite. Where Finch was loud and theatrical, David was quiet, precise, and methodical. He presented a mountain of evidence testifying to Arthur Kensington's sharp mind. Right up to his death business deals, he'd closed complex market analyses, he'd written and sworn affidavits from his doctors and staff. "This is not a case about mental competence, Your Honor." David countered, his voice resonating with calm authority. "It is a case about a grandfather's right to leave his legacy to his only living blood relative. The only predatory intrusion here is the attempt by a third party with no legal standing whatsoever to steal an inheritance that does not belong to them." The deposition process was brutal. Jessica had to sit for hours in a sterile conference room while Walter Finch drilled into every aspect of her life. He asked invasive questions about her time in foster care, her college relationships, and her marriage to Brendan Tram. "Morgan, isn't it true that you were facing significant student loan debt before you met Brendan?" "Prescott," Finch would ask, leaning forward like a predator. "Yes, like most students," Jessica would reply, calmly coached by David to remain impassive. "A debt that magically disappeared after your marriage. It must have felt like winning the lottery," he'd sneer. The most grueling part was the questioning about her pregnancy. Finch demanded a prenatal paternity test. David argued vehemently against it, citing the medical risks and the pure harassment inherent in the demand. Judge Davies, however, was in a bind. While sympathetic, the core of the Prescott's challenge rested on paternity. Reluctantly, she ordered the test. It was a small victory for the Prescotts, and they made sure the media knew about it. But the battle took an unexpected turn with the arrival of a new player. A motion was filed by another law firm, representing a claimant named Sophia Kensington. Sophia Kensington, it turned out, was Arthur Kensington's grandniece, a distant relative from a branch of the family that had been estranged for half a century. She was a London-based art dealer, sophisticated and well-regarded in her field. Her claim was that as a Kensington by birth, she had a more legitimate right to the estate than an unknown grandchild of a disowned daughter. At first, Jessica felt a wave of despair. Another enemy, another fight. Finch and the Prescotts were ecstatic seeing Sophia as the perfect tool to invalidate Jessica's claim entirely. They immediately reached out to her, offering to form a legal alliance. Jessica met Sophia for the first time during a court-mandated mediation session. Sophia was elegant and composed, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through people. She was not the arrogant aristocrat Jessica had expected. There was a watchfulness about her, a hint of skepticism. During a break, Sophia approached Jessica in the hallway. "You don't look like the monster they're making you out to be." "Sophia," said her British accent, crisp and clear. "And you don't look like someone who would ally herself with the likes of Genevieve Prescott." Jessica replied, her hand on her belly. A flicker of something annoyance, perhaps, crossed Sophia's face. "The Prescotts are useful. My lawyers believe our combined claims strengthen our position against you. My grandfather wanted his legacy to go to his direct bloodline, to his daughter's child, not to a distant cousin he hadn't spoken to in 50 years. Jessica stated her voice, firm. Sophia studied her for a long moment. "My great-uncle was a difficult man. He cut off our side of the family over a business dispute with my grandfather. I'm told he held grudges until his dying day. Why should I believe he had a sudden change of heart for a granddaughter he never even met? Because he spent the last 10 years of his life looking for me, Jessica said, her voice softening. Because he died regretting what he did to my mother. Maybe he was trying to make things right. The conversation was brief, but it planted a seed of doubt. Sophia was no fool. She could see the naked, grasping ambition of the Prescotts. She had agreed to the alliance out of legal strategy, but standing face to face with the pregnant, determined woman at the center of the storm, she began to wonder if she was on the right side of the fight. The legal battlefield was set, but the alliances were beginning to shift in ways no one, least of all Genevieve Prescott, could have predicted. While Walter Finch focused on public humiliation, David Chen's team was engaged in a quieter, more devastating form of warfare discovery. They subpoenaed decades of Prescott family business records, personal emails, and financial statements. It was a fishing expedition, but David was betting that a family as obsessed with image as the Prescotts would have skeletons hidden behind layers of legal and financial complexity. The first breakthrough came from an old file buried in Arthur Kensington's personal records. It detailed a series of real estate deals from the early 1990s between Kensington Holdings and Prescott Properties, then run by Brendan's father, Robert Prescott. The documents revealed that Robert Prescott had engaged in what amounted to corporate espionage, stealing a proprietary development model from Kensington and using it to undercut him on a massive downtown development project. The betrayal had not only cost Arthur millions, but had also been the final nail in the coffin of their friendship. It was the source of the deep-seated animosity, the grudge that Genevieve had inherited and nurtured for 30 years. This isn't just about Jessica's background, David explained, laying out the documents in front of her. This is a generational vendetta. Genevieve doesn't just disapprove of you. She hates what you represent. You are Arthur Kensington's legacy, and she wants to destroy it just like her husband tried to. While David's team dug into the Prescotts, Jessica delved into her own family's past. David had given her access to a storage unit containing Arthur Kensington's personal effects. Among the dusty boxes of books and records, she found a collection of leather-bound journals. For nights on end, Jessica sat and read her grandfather's words. The journals revealed a man far different from the unforgiving tyrant her mother had described. He wrote of his deep love for his daughter Elizabeth, and his heartbreak when she fell in love with Jessica's father, a man he saw as unstable and incapable of supporting her. His decision to cut her off was, in his own tormented words, a desperate, foolish attempt to protect her, to force her to return to a life of security. It was a mistake that had cost him everything. He wrote about his decades of regret, the hollow victories in the boardroom that meant nothing without family to share them with. The later entries were filled with his search for Jessica, his hope of finding her, and atoning for his sins. I saw her picture today, he wrote, in an entry dated just 6 months before his death. In a society column on the arm of that Prescott boy, she has her mother's eyes. To see her entangled with the son of Robert Prescott is a cruel trick of fate. I must reach out. I cannot let that venomous family poison her life as they tried to poison mine. Jessica wept as she read those words. Her grandfather hadn't abandoned her family. He had made a terrible mistake and spent a lifetime trying to fix it. The inheritance wasn't a random windfall. It was a legacy of love and regret. Armed with this new understanding, Jessica reached out to the one person who might understand the complexities of a Kensington family grudge, Sophia. She requested a private meeting without lawyers. They met at a neutral location, a small cafe in the West Village. Jessica didn't start with legal arguments. She started with the journals. She showed Sophia the passages about her great-uncle's regret, his love for his daughter, and his desperate search for his granddaughter. She shared the story of the betrayal by Robert Prescott. "The Prescotts aren't your allies, Sophia," Jessica said, her voice earnest. "They're using you. They see you as a convenient way to muddy the waters and discredit me. Once you've served your purpose, they will discard you." Genevieve Prescott doesn't care about Kensington legacy. She cares about Prescott dominance. Sophia listened, her impassive facade slowly cracking. She had felt the condescension from Genevieve, seen the avarice in Walter Finch's eyes. She recognized the pattern of family pride and long-held grudges. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place a week later. The results of the court-ordered paternity test came in. David Chen received them first and called Jessica immediately. "It's confirmed, Jessica," he said, a note of triumph in his voice. "Brendan Prescott is the father. 99.999% probability." This was the silver bullet they needed. But David had an idea. "We're not going to release this yet," he said. "Finch and the Prescotts have built their entire public case on the idea that you're a liar and your child is illegitimate. We're going to let them walk right into that trap in open court." That afternoon, Sophia Kensington called David Chen's office. She had fired her lawyers. She explained that she had been approached by Walter Finch with a settlement offer. They would give her a small percentage of the estate if she would sign a sworn affidavit containing fabricated, damaging information about Jessica's character. The offer had revealed the Prescotts' true nature. Sophia was a Kensington, and she would not be a party to such a dishonorable attack. "I am withdrawing my claim to the estate, Mr. Chen," she announced. "My great-uncle made his wishes clear. The legacy belongs to his granddaughter. Furthermore, I am prepared to testify about Mr. Finch's offer and the Prescott family's attempts to suborn perjury." The storm had not broken. It had turned back on itself, and the secrets unraveled were not Jessica's, but those of the Prescott family. The stage was set for the final act, and Genevieve Prescott had no idea that her star witness was about to become her executioner. The final hearing was a media spectacle. Reporters and sketch artists packed the gallery of Judge Davies's courtroom. Genevieve Prescott sat in the front row, a portrait of icy composure in a Chanel suit flanked by her legal team. She expected this to be her day of vindication. Walter Finch had assured her that their case, though circumstantial, was a masterpiece of narrative control. They had successfully painted Jessica as a woman of low moral character in the court of public opinion. Jessica sat beside David Chen, her pregnancy now beautifully apparent. She was no longer the frightened, abandoned woman in a soaked Valentino dress. She met Genevieve's cold stare with a quiet strength that seemed to unnerve the older woman. The proceedings began, and Finch launched into his closing arguments, weaving a tapestry of lies and innuendo. He spoke of Jessica's unstable past and her remarkable talent for latching on to wealthy benefactors. His voice dripped with scorn as he came to his central point. "And what of the child?" he boomed, gesturing towards Jessica. "The child who is the very key to this $2.7 billion treasure chest. The claimant has refused to be transparent about the child's paternity, hiding behind legal motions and delays. We contend she knows the child is not a Prescott, and by extension, not a true heir to the Kensington bloodline as stipulated in the will." It was the moment David Chen had been waiting for. "Objection, Your Honor," David said, rising calmly. "Counsel is making factual claims for which he has no evidence. In fact, we have definitive evidence to the contrary." Judge Davies looked at David. "Mr. Chen, Your Honor, we have the results of the court-ordered paternity test. We are prepared to submit them into evidence now." A murmur went through the courtroom. Walter Finch's face went pale. He had been so certain they were hiding something. David handed the sealed envelope to the court clerk. Judge Davies opened it, read the report, and her eyebrows shot up. According to this certified report, the judge announced, her voice ringing with authority, the probability of Brendan Prescott being the biological father is 99.999%. The court accepts this as conclusive proof of paternity. The sound in the courtroom was a collective gasp. Genevieve Prescott's mask of composure shattered. She shot a venomous glare at Finch, whose blustering confidence had evaporated. But David Chen wasn't finished. "Your Honor, we call one final witness to the stand, Ms. Sophia Kensington." Sophia walked to the stand elegant and poised. Her testimony was devastating. She calmly recounted Walter Finch's offer to pay her in exchange for false testimony against Jessica. She detailed the specific lies they had asked her to tell. "They wanted me to say that I had knowledge of Ms. Morgan having multiple affairs during her marriage." Sophia said, her gaze steady. "It was a complete fabrication designed for the sole purpose of character assassination." Finch was on his feet, objecting furiously, but the damage was done. The Prescott's entire case had been exposed as a malicious, fraudulent scheme. The final and most dramatic moment came when David Chen called his last witness, Brendan Prescott. Genevieve had fought to keep him away, but David had secured a subpoena. Brendan looked gaunt and miserable. He avoided looking at both his mother and Jessica. Under David's careful questioning, Brendan admitted to abandoning Jessica. He admitted he had no reason to doubt her fidelity. The questions then turned to his mother. "Mr. Prescott." David asked, his voice gentle but firm. "Was it your idea to contest this will?" Brendan hesitated, looking at his mother. Her eyes were burning into him, a silent command to lie. "Wasn't it your mother, Genevieve Prescott, who hired Walter Finch?" David pressed. "Wasn't it your mother who first suggested the child might not be yours? Wasn't it your mother who orchestrated this entire campaign?" Brendan looked at Jessica, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw the strong, beautiful woman he had once loved, the mother of his child, whom he had allowed his family to publicly crucify. Something inside him finally broke. "Yes," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It was her, all of it. I never wanted any of this." He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs. It was over. The lies, the conspiracy, all of it lay exposed on the courtroom floor. Judge Davies's verdict was swift and scathing. She not only dismissed the Prescott's petition, but excoriated them for their actions. "This court has witnessed a grotesque abuse of the legal system," she declared, her voice filled with contempt as she stared directly at Genevieve and Walter Finch. "A campaign of slander and deceit motivated by nothing more than greed and malice. The petition is dismissed with prejudice." She then turned to Jessica, her expression softening. "The court finds no impediment, legal or moral, to the execution of Arthur Kensington's last will and testament. Ms. Jessica Morgan and her child are the sole and rightful heirs to the Kensington estate. This court declares her the legal beneficiary. The probate court is ordered to begin the transfer of all assets to her control effective immediately." A cheer erupted from Jessica's supporters in the back. David Chen gripped her hand in victory. Across the aisle, Genevieve Prescott sat frozen, her face a mask of pure fury and defeat. She had lost. Jessica, the girl she had thrown onto the street, had won. As court was adjourned, Jessica stood up, a billionaire heiress, her name cleared, and her future and the future of her child finally her own. The aftermath of the verdict was a whirlwind. The media, which had so eagerly vilified Jessica, now lionized her. She was the modern-day Cinderella, the wronged woman, who had faced down the dragon and won the kingdom. Headlines celebrated her victory. Street to heiress Jessica Morgan wins billion-dollar inheritance. Prescott empire crumbles in courtroom shocker. The Prescott family imploded. Walter Finch was facing a Bar Association review for suborning perjury. The revelations about Robert Prescott's past business dealings triggered SEC investigations into Prescott properties, unearthing years of creative accounting. Their reputation was in tatters, their influence shattered. Genevieve became a social pariah, a prisoner in her own penthouse. But Jessica had no time for their drama. 2 weeks after the verdict, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Arthur. Holding her son in her arms, looking into his tiny, trusting face, she knew the true meaning of wealth. The $7 billion was a tool, a means to an end. Her son was the real treasure. Life changed in unimaginable ways. She moved into her grandfather's magnificent Fifth Avenue townhouse, a place filled with history and art. But she made it a home, not a museum. The staff, who had served Arthur Kensington loyally for years, embraced her and the baby with warmth and affection. Sophia Kensington became a frequent visitor, flying in from London. The two women, bound by the strange legacy of their family, formed a genuine friendship. Sophia became young Arthur's godmother and a beloved aunt. Jessica proved to be a natural at managing her new responsibilities. Guided by David Chen, who was now not just her lawyer, but a trusted friend and advisor, she took control of Kensington Holdings. She didn't just sit on the board, she led it. She steered the company towards ethical investments and philanthropic ventures, proving she had inherited her grandfather's business acumen, along with his fortune. Her first major act as CEO was the establishment of the Elizabeth Foundation, named after her mother. It was a multi-million-dollar charity dedicated to providing housing, legal aid, and job training for single mothers and children aging out of the foster care system. She remembered the terror of being alone and pregnant on the street, the hopelessness of the women she met in the shelter. She would use her vast resources to ensure others had the safety net she never did. One day, about a year later, she received a letter from Brendan. It was a short, rambling note, filled with apologies and self-pity. He was divorced from his family's influence, his trust fund cut off, working a modest job and living in a small apartment. He asked if he could see his son. Jessica thought about it for a long time. She met him in a public park, a neutral ground. He looked diminished, the arrogant charm replaced by a weary sadness. She looked at him not with hatred, but with a kind of distant pity. "You can see Arthur," she said, her voice even. "He deserves to know his father. But you will be a guest in his life, Brendan. You will not disrupt it. And you will never, ever be part of mine again." It was the closure she needed. That evening, Jessica stood on the terrace of her townhouse, holding her son as he slept on her shoulder. The city glittered below them, the same city of unforgiving streets and gilded cages. She had seen both sides of it. She had been broken by it, and then she had conquered it. She was no longer Jessica Prescott, the discarded wife, or even Jessica Morgan, the surprise heiress. She was a Kensington, a mother, the architect of her own destiny. Looking down at the sleeping child in her arms, she knew her grandfather's legacy was safe. A new beginning built on a foundation of resilience and love was just getting started. 5 years is both a lifetime and the blink of an eye. In the 5 years since the verdict, the name Jessica Morgan had been quietly replaced in the public consciousness by Jessica Kensington. She had legally reclaimed her mother's maiden name, not just for herself, but for her son, Arthur Kensington. The name Prescott was a closed chapter, a historical footnote in her life story. Jessica was no longer famous for the inheritance she had won. She was renowned for what she had built with it. A recent cover story in The Economist had dubbed her the conscious capitalist, detailing how she had transformed Kensington Holdings from a traditional profit-driven behemoth into a global leader in sustainable development and ethical enterprise. But her true passion, the beating heart of her new life, was the Elizabeth Foundation. Today was the grand opening of the Foundation's flagship facility in the Bronx, a sprawling, state-of-the-art campus named Haven House. It wasn't merely a shelter. It was a comprehensive support center offering long-term housing, early childhood education, legal services and job placement programs for mothers in crisis. Jessica stood on a small stage in the sunlit central courtyard, looking out at the crowd. It was an eclectic mix of city officials, donors, and most importantly, the families who would call this place a temporary home. Holding her hand was 5-year-old Arthur, a bright, curious boy, with his mother's kind eyes and a shock of dark hair. They say legacy is what you leave behind. Jessica said, her voice clear and steady, amplified by a modest speaker system. But I believe legacy is what you build right now. It is the foundation of hope you lay for those who will come after. Haven House is not my legacy or my mother's. It belongs to every woman who walks through these doors, and to every child who will get the safe start in life that they deserve. After the speech, she walked through the facility holding her son's hand. He looked up at the colorful murals in the children's wing, his face full of wonder. "Mommy, can I play with the big blocks?" he asked, pointing to a brightly lit playroom where several children were already laughing and building towers. "Of course, sweetie," she said, kneeling down to his level. "Remember what we talked about? These are our friends, and it's important to share and be kind." He nodded seriously and ran off to join them. David Chen, his hair now flecked with grey, but his smile as warm as ever, came to her side. He was the chairman of the Foundation's board. "He's a good kid, Jessica," David said. "He's what this is all for," she replied, watching her son carefully help a smaller girl place a block on a wobbly tower. "Any word?" David asked quietly, his tone shifting slightly. Jessica knew who he meant. Brendan. The court had granted him supervised visitation once a month. The meetings were awkward, sterile affairs held in a private family center. Brendan would bring expensive, inappropriate toys, trying to buy the affection he didn't know how to earn. Arthur was polite but distant, treating the visits like a strange chore. His lawyer sent a request to increase the visits, Jessica said with a sigh. "I'll let the parenting coordinator handle it." It's sad, David. He sees Arthur, he sees all this, and all he can talk about is how much his mother blames him for losing everything. The Prescott name was now synonymous with disgrace. Genevieve lived as a recluse in the cavernous penthouse, having sold off most of the company's assets to settle lawsuits and government fines. Her social circle had vanished. Her power was gone. For a woman like Genevieve, such profound irrelevance was a fate worse than any prison. Later that afternoon, as the opening event wound down, Sophia Kensington arrived flying in straight from a business trip in Paris. She swept Arthur into a huge hug, showering him with affection. "He gets more handsome every time I see him," she declared, handing him a small, beautifully wrapped gift. As the three of them, Jessica, David, and Sophia, watched Arthur play, Jessica felt a deep sense of peace. They were a family, not one bound by blood in the traditional sense, but one forged in a crucible of loyalty, respect, and shared purpose. They were the true legacy of Arthur Kensington, her grandfather. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the courtyard, Jessica looked at the main entrance of Haven House. Above the glass doors, a simple quote from one of her grandfather's journals was etched into the stone. "True wealth is not what you keep, but what you give away." She thought of that night in the rain, cold, pregnant, and utterly alone, with nothing but a ruined dress and a $100 bill. She had been left on the street deemed worthless. Now, from that very spot of absolute desolation, she had built a sanctuary. She hadn't just won a fortune. She had transformed a legacy of pain into a future of boundless hope, not just for herself, but for countless others. And that was a victory greater than any judge could ever declare. Jessica's story is a powerful reminder that our circumstances do not define our worth. She was thrown away like trash, left with nothing but the clothes on her back and a life growing inside her. The most powerful people in New York tried to crush her, to erase her, to declare her and her child worthless. But they underestimated her strength. This wasn't just a story about money. It was a story about justice, resilience, and the incredible power of a mother fighting for her child's future. It proves that even when you feel most alone, there can be a destiny waiting for you that is bigger and brighter than anything you could ever imagine. If her incredible journey from the cold streets to the boardroom moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of hope, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true life dramas that will inspire and amaze you. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.